In Nairobi, everyone seemed to know Amara and Tay. Neighbors, colleagues, even distant relatives often pointed at them as the example of what marriage should look like. They walked into gatherings hand in hand, always smiling, always matching in quiet harmony. People whispered about how lucky Amara was to have such a supportive husband and how perfectly they fit together. Amara herself believed it too. To her, Tay was not just her partner but her safe place, her anchor in a sometimes chaotic city. One warm evening, Amara sat with him in their living room, her voice bubbling with excitement as she talked about her younger sister Chika's upcoming wedding. She described the colors she imagined, the dances that would echo through the night, and the joy of seeing her baby sister start a new chapter. Tay listened attentively, nodding, asking questions, even offering small suggestions about venues and music. His interest made Amara feel even more grateful. She thought to herself how blessed she was that her husband cared not only for her, but for her family too. In those moments, the picture looked perfect. Amara saw her life as steady and full of love. With her sister's wedding on the horizon, she felt surrounded by happiness, as if nothing could go wrong. The thought of celebrating love within her family made her heart glow. From the outside, and even to herself, it seemed like the bond between her marriage and her family was strong, pure, and untouchable. Everything appeared unbreakable, at least for now. It started small, the kind of things most people wouldn't even notice. At first, Amara didn't think much of it. During the wedding meetings, she caught Tay and Chika laughing a little too loudly at some inside joke she wasn't part of. She brushed it off, telling herself that her husband was simply being friendly with her younger sister. After all, wasn't that a good thing? She wanted them to get along. Still, something about the way their eyes lingered on each other, just a second longer than necessary, made her chest tighten. As the preparations for Chika's wedding picked up, the closeness between them became harder to ignore. Whenever errands needed to be done, Tay was suddenly the one offering to drive Chika. Whether it was picking fabrics, choosing flowers, or meeting the caterer, he always seemed eager to help. Amara would sometimes offer to tag along, but before she could grab her bag, they would laugh and say, "It's okay, you don't need to stress, we'll be quick." She would smile, but deep inside, she felt left out of something she couldn't name. One afternoon, as they returned from yet another quick errand, Amara noticed Chika's hand resting too comfortably on Tay's arm as they walked in. It slipped away the moment their eyes met, but the image stayed with her. She told herself she was imagining things, that her mind was only exaggerating. She reminded herself of how much she loved and trusted her husband, how much she cherished her bond with her sister. Family, after all, was everything. But the whispers began to echo louder in her mind. Sometimes she would walk into the room and the two of them would go silent, exchanging a glance that felt heavy with something unspoken. When she asked what they were discussing, they would quickly change the subject. At night, Amara found herself replaying these small details in her head, wondering if there was more to them. She would shake her head, refusing to let suspicion grow. She wanted to believe that she was overthinking, that the bond she had with Tay and Chika was far too strong to be broken by something as ugly as distrust. Still, her heart told her otherwise. She began to notice how Chika's laughter around Tay carried a different tone, softer. She noticed how Tay paid attention to Chika's little habits, things only someone very observant, or very interested, would catch. These tiny cracks in the perfect picture unsettled Amara, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Confronting them seemed too extreme, too unnecessary. After all, weddings could make people act differently, couldn't they? Maybe she was just being sensitive, so Amara smiled, even when it hurt. She continued helping with the wedding plans, nodding and laughing when expected, while hiding the unease gnawing at her. On the outside, she remained the supportive sister and the devoted wife. On the inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, that the foundation of her world wasn't as solid as it once seemed. And though she tried to bury the doubt, a quiet storm was already brewing in her. It was a quiet night in Nairobi, the kind of night when the city finally seemed to pause. Amara lay in bed, scrolling absent-mindedly through her own phone, while Tay's phone sat charging on the nightstand. He had fallen asleep quickly, his breathing steady beside her. Just as she was about to switch off the light, his phone buzzed once, then again, then again. At first, she ignored it, telling herself it wasn't her place. But the messages kept coming, lighting up the dark room like a flashing warning she couldn't escape. Her heart pounded as she reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly. She told herself it was nothing, probably work, maybe friends. But when she unlocked the screen, something Tay had never cared to hide before, she froze. The notifications weren't from colleagues or old friends. They were from Chika. With shaky fingers, Amara opened the thread. Her eyes darted over the words, disbelief clouding her vision. The messages were far from innocent. There were late-night confessions, sweet nicknames, and promises wrapped in secret. Then there were photos, selfies, stolen moments, words of affection that no sister should ever send to her sister's husband. Amara scrolled further, her chest tightening with every screenshot saved, every exchange that confirmed the truth. The man she loved, the sister she trusted, had been betraying her together. She sat still, the phone heavy in her hand, her body numb. Betrayal was painful enough when it came from strangers, but this cut deeper. This was family. The two people she believed would protect her heart were the ones stabbing it from both sides. 1,000 memories rushed through her mind. Childhood laughter with Chica, wedding anniversaries with Tay, family dinners where the three of them sat at the same table. Now every smile, every word felt poisoned. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to wake Tay. Instead, she slipped quietly out of bed and into the living room, the phone still clutched in her hand. She read the messages again, forcing herself to see clearly what her heart wished to deny. They had been careful, yes, but not careful enough. There were mentions of stolen afternoons, excuses wrapped as errands, even jokes about how naive she was for never suspecting a thing. The cruelty of it all made her stomach twist. Amara curled into the sofa, pressing the phone against her chest as if it might stop her from falling apart. She wanted to scream, to confront him right there, to call her sister and demand answers. But instead, she sat in silence, her tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She realized in that moment that her world had changed forever. The illusion of a perfect marriage, a perfect family, was gone. What remained was the raw, unshakable truth. The man she loved and the sister she trusted had betrayed her in the worst way. And though the house was silent, inside Amara, a storm had just begun. Amara didn't confront Tay that night. She wanted to. Every bone in her body screamed to wake him up and throw the truth in his face. But instead, she chose silence. Not weakness, not fear, silence. She realized if she exploded too soon, they would deny it, twist it, maybe even make her look like the crazy one. No, she needed proof. She needed the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away with smooth lies or fake apology. From that day, Amara's eyes became sharper. She noticed every detail, every excuse, every so-called errand. She let them think she was blind while her mind stayed wide awake. When Tay announced he had a business trip coming up, her instincts told her this was her chance. Quietly, she checked his travel plans, cross-referenced them with Chica's sudden need to take a short break before the wedding. The pieces fit too perfectly. Something was happening in Kisumu. So Amara followed. Not openly, but in the shadows. She booked her own ticket, kept her movements quiet, and made sure neither of them had a clue. In Kisumu, she stayed in a modest hotel near the lake, watching and waiting. And just as she feared, her suspicions came to life. She saw them together, holding hands when they thought no one was watching, whispering in restaurants tucked away from the main streets, laughing with a kind of intimacy that burned Amara's chest. Her phone became her weapon. She snapped photos from a distance, careful, steady, catching the way Chica leaned her head on Tay's shoulder, the way he brushed her hair back like a lover. She recorded voice notes when they sat too close, their words soft but clear enough to betray them. She kept receipts too, hotel bookings, restaurant bills, even a shared taxi ride that left their names side by side. Every piece of evidence went into a hidden folder, a growing archive of their lies. Each night back in her hotel room, Amara would sit with her laptop, organizing the proof. She labeled photos, saved screenshots, filed voice notes. It felt mechanical, almost cold, but it was the only way to keep from breaking apart. Anger became her shield, determination her fuel. The more she gathered, the calmer she felt. She wasn't powerless anymore. They thought they were clever, but she was already 10 steps ahead. When she finally left Kisumu, her bag was heavier, not with clothes, but with secrets, proof so sharp it could cut through any denial. She returned to Nairobi quietly, carrying herself like nothing was wrong. To the outside world, she was still the supportive wife and sister, still part of the perfect picture. But beneath her calm smile, a storm raged in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. Amara knew she wouldn't keep quiet forever. She was just waiting, planning, and preparing for the day the truth would no longer hide. The weeks before the wedding were filled with noise, colors, and endless planning. Everyone in the family seemed caught up in Chica's excitement. She was the bride, the star of the moment, and she loved every bit of attention that came her way. Chica often sat in the living room surrounded by cousins and aunties, her voice carrying loudly as she described her dream wedding. She bragged about the designer dress, the extravagant venue in Mombasa, the hundreds of guests flying in. Every detail was another reason to boast. Amara sat quietly in the background, smiling when expected, nodding when spoken to. She had become a master at hiding the storm inside her. Chica, however, seemed to notice her silence and almost enjoyed poking at it. "You know, Amara," she said one evening, tossing her hair with a smirk, "your life is so calm. Some might even say boring. You don't take risks, you don't shine." I can't imagine living like that. My wedding will be talked about for years. Yours. She let the sentence trail off, leaving the insult hanging in the air. The family laughed lightly, not because it was funny, but because no one wanted to dampen Chica's mood. A few relatives even nodded, agreeing with her, praising her for her spark and boldness. No one defended Amara. No one noticed how her eyes dimmed, or maybe they noticed and chose to ignore it. After all, Chica was the bride-to-be. Brides could say anything and still be adored. Amara's mother gently chided her once, saying, "Don't take it to heart, Amara. Your sister is just excited. Let her have her moment." So Amara stayed quiet. She kept her face calm, her voice soft, and her body still, even though inside, her heart twisted with every word. They didn't know the truth she carried. They didn't know the evidence hidden in her folder, the late-night photos, the voice notes, the receipts. If they did, they wouldn't be praising Chica so loudly. Tay, on the other hand, blended into the family gatherings with practiced ease. He played the role of the supportive brother-in-law and doting husband flawlessly. He joked with relatives, carried bags when needed, and smiled as if nothing was wrong. Amara watched him carefully, her calmness now sharper than any glare. She let him believe he was winning, that his secret was still safe. But beneath her silence, something powerful was building. Each cruel remark from Chica, each careless laugh from the family, only added fuel to the fire in Amara's chest. She wasn't broken, not anymore. She was waiting. At night, alone in her room, Amara would stare at her folder of evidence and whisper to herself, "Not yet." She knew timing was everything. She wanted them to be comfortable, to believe they had fooled her completely. And when the right moment came, she would open the box of secrets she had carefully built. So while Chica flaunted her dream wedding and mocked her boring life, Amara sat in silence. But her silence was not weakness. It was preparation. The day was coming when the laughter would end, and only the truth would remain. The wedding day finally arrived, and Mombasa buzzed with celebration. The venue was nothing short of spectacular. A grand hall filled with golden lights, flowers cascading from the ceiling, and tables dressed in fine linen. Guests streamed in wearing bright colors, their laughter mixing with the sound of drums and soft music. Cameras flashed everywhere, capturing moments that were meant to be remembered forever. Chica had gotten her dream wedding, and she glowed as she moved through the crowd, her white gown sparkling under the lights. Tay stood beside her, handsome in his suit, smiling as if he had no worries in the world. He held her hand confidently, guiding her through the guests, bowing slightly as people praised them for being such a beautiful couple. To everyone watching, they looked flawless, an image of joy and love. No one could see the cracks beneath the shine. No one knew what Amara knew. Amara entered the hall quietly, her steps measured, her posture elegant. She wore a deep emerald dress that shimmered with every movement, her hair pinned neatly, her face calm. Guests turned to look at her, whispering about how graceful she looked. To them, she was just the supportive sister of the bride, the faithful wife of Tay. They had no idea that beneath her still smile, a storm raged, waiting for its perfect moment. She took her seat near the front, her eyes scanning the room. Everything looked like a picture from a magazine. Laughter, music, the bride glowing, the groom pretending. Amara folded her hands in her lap, steadying her breathing. She watched as Tay leaned toward Chica, whispering something that made her giggle, the kind of giggle Amara had once cherished in her marriage. The sight stung, but her face gave nothing away. Throughout the ceremony, the priest spoke of love, loyalty, and family. Every word felt like a knife pressed against Amara's skin, but she stayed silent. She clapped when everyone clapped, smiled when people turned to her, and even leaned into conversations with relatives as if she were part of the joy. Only she knew her calmness wasn't peace. It was the silence before thunder. When the vows were exchanged, Amara's hands tightened slightly around her glass of water. She watched as her husband promised faithfulness, and forever to her sister, the words rolling easily off his tongue. She almost laughed at the irony. The guests clapped again, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Amara only raised her chin higher, her silence louder than any applause. She looked beautiful, untouchable, almost regal in her composure. No one knew her heart carried a secret folder full of photos, messages, and recordings. No one knew that beneath her calm exterior, she had already written the ending to this fairy tale. As the music swelled and the couple walked down the aisle together, smiling at the cheering crowd, Amara stayed seated, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Not of joy, not of pain, but of certainty. They thought they were celebrating their victory, but Amara knew the night would not end as they expected. The stage was set, and she was ready. The music died down as it was time for the wedding speeches. Guests straightened in their seats, some clutching champagne glasses, others adjusting their dresses, all smiling politely at the happy couple. Chica beamed, Tay looked proud, and the room buzzed with warm congratulations. Then, from the front row, Amara stood up. She raised her own glass, her movements calm, deliberate. The chatter faded instantly. People expected her to offer a kind word, a blessing for the bride and groom. What they didn't expect was what came next. Amara's voice was steady, even, as she addressed the room. "I'd like to say a few words," she began, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. The smiles she encountered faltered slightly, a hint of curiosity creeping into the room. She didn't hesitate. Instead of the typical toast, she tapped the remote in her hand, and the large screen behind the couple flickered to life. Photos began to appear, pictures of Tay and Chica together, holding hands, leaning close, captured in moments no one was supposed to see. Gasps swept through the hall like a sudden gust of wind. Murmurs began rising, but Amara didn't stop. She clicked to the next slide, revealing screenshots of messages that left nothing to the imagination. Late-night conversations, flirty texts, secret plans, promises that belonged to no one but themselves. Her calm, controlled voice read snippets aloud, making the evidence undeniable. The room froze, the air thick with shock. Even Tay opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Chica's face went pale. She tried to laugh it off at first, but the laughter caught in her throat as Amara continued, moving from photos to voice notes, receipts, and even taxi bookings showing the two of them together at odd hours. Every proof piled on, leaving the couple without any corner to hide in. The whispers grew into shocked exclamations. Eyes darted between the bride and the groom, trying to reconcile the couple they had admired for months with the betrayal now laid bare. Amara's face was unreadable, her posture elegant, her hands steady on the glass she held. Her voice never wavered, even as the room trembled with confusion, disbelief, and anger. She spoke slowly, ensuring that everyone understood. "I have tried to stay calm, tried to let this day be about family and love. But the truth cannot wait. You all deserve to know what's really been happening behind the smiles and celebrations." The sound of whispers and murmurs was deafening now. People turned to one another, pointing, shaking their heads, struggling to make sense of the revelations. Tay's face twisted with panic, Chica's with shame, and for the first time that day, neither looked like the perfect couple everyone had admired. Amara lowered the remote, took a slow sip from her glass, and let the silence settle over the hall. She had shown the truth. The facade had shattered. The power had shifted. And in that moment, every eye in the room knew one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the slideshow ended, the room fell into a stunned silence. Chica's carefully painted smile had vanished. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bouquet, and then, almost as if it had weight she could no longer bear, it slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Everyone gasped. Some whispered, others froze, staring at the bride and groom as if the world had shifted beneath them. Tay opened his mouth, stammering, trying to deny what had just been revealed. "Amara, it's not. I mean, it's..." But no words could patch the hole the truth had torn in the room. His eyes darted to Chica, silently pleading for support, but she had none to give. Her face was pale, her lips pressed together, and for the first time, she looked small and vulnerable, not the dazzling bride everyone had admired. Amara stood tall, her posture calm, her gaze steady. She had waited for this moment with every ounce of patience she had stored in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Slowly, she opened a folder she had hidden in her bag. One by one, she laid out documents, receipts, and voice recordings. Hotel bills with both their names, taxi receipts time-stamped during errands, screenshots of messages too intimate to ignore. Every piece of evidence lined up perfectly, leaving no room for denial. She let the room absorb it all, letting the weight of truth press down on every whisper and stunned glance. The reaction was immediate. Tay's relatives stared in disbelief, their faces tightening with shame and anger. Chica's family looked around frantically, as if searching for someone to blame, only to realize they had been celebrating a lie. Murmurs turned into sharp exclamations. Some guests covered their mouths, some shook their heads, and slowly, one by one, they began to leave. The groom's family, disgusted and humiliated, stormed out of the hall, slamming doors and muttering accusations. The celebration had crumbled, leaving only tension and shock in its place. Chica tried to speak, but the words came out in a tremor, weak and hollow. "Amara, she couldn't finish. Tay, desperate, reached out, tried to grab her hand, tried to explain, but no one listened. The entire ceremony had fallen apart. Flowers wilted under the weight of the moment. The music that had played joyously only hours before now seemed distant, a ghost of what the day was meant to be. Amara's calmness became more striking against the chaos. Her storm, carefully contained for so long, had broken at the perfect time. She watched the couple crumble, their carefully built illusion now completely destroyed. Around her, people whispered, stared, and left, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. The truth was out, and for the first time, Amara felt unshakable. The wedding that had been meant to celebrate love now bore witness to betrayal, lies, and humiliation. And at the center of it all, Amara stood silently victorious, a quiet force of justice in a room where pretenses had finally collapsed. The hall was chaos. Voices clashed, footsteps echoed, and the carefully polished image of a perfect wedding lay in ruin. Chica and Tay argued loudly in the center of the room, their faces red with shame and frustration, each blaming the other, while everyone else watched in stunned silence. Guests whispered and pointed, some filming on their phones, capturing the collapse of the couple everyone had admired. But through it all, Amara remained calm. Her dress flowed around her as she moved gracefully, her head held high, her eyes steady. She didn't rush. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. The power she had quietly built over weeks now belonged to her. Every photo, every screenshot, every piece of evidence she had collected had shifted the balance. They had once thought they were untouchable, clever enough to keep their secret hidden. Now they were exposed, and the humiliation belonged to them, not her. The whispers and gasps followed her as she walked past the arguing couple, but she barely noticed. She was a step ahead, untangled from the lies and betrayal that had once threatened to trap her. Outside, the evening air of Mombasa felt warm and free. Amara stepped onto the street, the sounds of the ruined wedding fading behind her. She breathed deeply, feeling a sense of release she hadn't experienced in months. The weight that had pressed on her chest, the hurt, the anger, the disbelief, was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had taken back her life, her dignity, and her peace. Every step away from the hall felt like reclaiming herself, piece by piece. People who had been cheering for Chica's wedding now watched her leave, some in confusion, others in admiration. Amara didn't care about their opinions. She had never walked away from anything in her life with such certainty, such clarity. This wasn't revenge born of anger. It was justice, executed calmly and decisively. She had given the truth its stage, and now it was time to live beyond the chaos that had surrounded her. Even as the couple continued their bitter argument behind her, Amara's mind was already moving forward. She thought of the life she wanted, one without lies, one where she could wake up knowing she had control over her own story. The betrayal that had cut so deep now felt like a lesson, a spark that had ignited something stronger in her. She had survived deception, humiliation, and heartbreak, and she had emerged not broken, but empowered. By the time she hailed a cab to take her back to her quiet apartment, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon. The city glowed with evening light, and for the first time in a long while, Amara smiled without fear or restraint. She was free. The storm she had carried in silence had passed, leaving clarity and strength in its wake. And as she looked back at the glowing skyline, she knew one simple truth. The tables had turned, and she was the one who now held all the power. Days after the disastrous wedding, Amara sat across from her lawyer, the final papers of her divorce resting neatly on the desk. She signed each page with steady hands, the past months of pain and betrayal flowing out of her with every stroke of the pen. The man she had once loved, the sister she had trusted, were now officially part of her past. No anger, no tears this time, just clarity. The weight she had carried for so long was lifting, leaving space for something she hadn't felt in months: peace. She moved into her new apartment the same week, a small, sunlit space overlooking Nairobi's skyline. She unpacked slowly, placing each item with care, choosing colors and objects that reflected her own tastes, her own life. For the first time in years, she felt that the home belonged entirely to her. She planted flowers on the balcony, arranged her books just the way she liked, and even splurged on a painting she had admired for months. Every little detail reminded her that this was her world now, free from lies and deceit. Amara invested in herself in ways she had postponed for too long. She enrolled in courses she had always dreamed of, treated herself to long walks by the beach, and allowed herself quiet moments to think, to plan, to grow. Friends noticed a new lightness in her step, a calm confidence that hadn't been there before. She realized that betrayal, though painful, had pushed her to reclaim her life in ways she never would have imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, a gentle smile on her lips. She whispered to herself, almost softly enough for no one to hear, "Some betrayals destroy you, others set you free." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it fully. She was free, she was whole, and her life had only just begun.